Welcome back to Real Estate Mindset. Today's video is going to be absolutely bonkers, and first and foremost, happy Monday and happy Labor Day. I thought, Mitch and I thought that today's video would be absolutely appropriate because we're going to go over the labor market conditions, essentially the labor market collapse, and how apparently those job losses that are accelerating are necessary to support the bad spending habits of the Federal Reserve. So on top of giving you guys a thorough breakdown of the layoffs of the labor market, we're going to end this video giving you guys a full understanding, full comprehension, crystal clear on what exactly the Federal Reserve has been doing and just how bad it really is for our country. So, before I begin, I want to give you guys a quick update though on the classes. I did this whole thing so far, guys. I had the flu, maybe the cold, I don't know. But you guys can access this right now. Here's the property tax. This is completely free. How to fight property tax. Again, just wanted to show you real quick. It's not completed, but I have done 4 chapters, as you can see here. I'm going to add a couple things here from Mitch, but we got quizzes, we got summaries. I took you guys all the way up to homesteads. Next chapter is going to be the protest. So again, just wanted to let the viewers know, Mitch, that we are working for them behind the scenes. And before we dig into the video, can you tell the viewers who you met this weekend, sir?
It was one heck of a Saturday. So I went to have a cappuccino with Matt Lyon, who flew in from Florida to attend an event. So his business partner, Garrett, was with him. So I went to have a cappuccino. And next thing I know, I'm sitting with a radio host who happens to have a real estate background. And then next thing I know, he goes to get George Gammon, who I've seen a couple of his videos. And we end up in a conversation with George Gammon, and we end up in a conversation with Chris Martinson. And I ended up being part in an audience with RFK Jr. being interviewed by Robert Kiyosaki. I just went there for a cappuccino, but I was able to talk to these people and explain, because Matt literally took me to meet them and said, just listen to this. He literally said, just listen to this, gave me a 4 or 5 minute intro. And every meeting that I had turned into 40 or 50 minutes of explaining what was going on under the hood. So they were all very kind and said, we would like to have you come and talk with us on one of their broadcasts. So they realized that this really is all hands on deck. And everybody that's involved in this so far has literally opened up the box and said, whatever you want, you've got. That we have to take this national, because the truth is the CADs are ground zero. And they understood that right from the word go. And boy, did they pepper me with questions. But It was fantastic. Like I said, I went for a cappuccino. The next thing I know, I'm in the audience watching RFK give a presentation, being interviewed by Ken McElroy and Robert Kiyosaki. It's just like, okay, great Saturday. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's got to be refreshing, Mitch, to know that what we are doing, especially what your body of work is now getting the attention it deserves, because math matters. And we are being lied to. And the Federal Reserve has been helping the elite, or at least they've been the ones taking advantage of the situation. I mean, the Federal Reserve's job is to support the banks. It's to support the banks. It's not to support households, regardless of what they're saying. So I'm going to start, Mitch, by taking the viewers and giving them a quick update on the labor market. Here's the unemployment rate. Now, this is going to update like very, very soon. But right now, we're at 4.3% unemployment. Historically, that's low. But the important thing to understand and to pay attention to on this graph is the trajectory. You can clearly see the trajectory of unemployment going up. And I also want to caution you guys that when recession starts, generally, it's skyrockets. Like parabolic, straight up in the air. Everyone's losing their job. You can kind of see that here, but regardless, you guys, it's getting worse. We have hit what's called the Sham rule, which is generally referred to as an indicator that is suggesting we're 100% going into recession. And I think people are starting to get that, Mitch. Now, I also wanted to remind you guys as the viewers, remember what's going on with the manipulation. And when we say like they, I'm talking about the Federal Reserve and elite. All right. I'm talking about the people who really own the government, the people that are running the government. It's not the people. That's not ours. But regardless, the U.S. added 818,000 fewer jobs than reported earlier. I just want to remind you guys, we are being lied to. And I would ask you as the viewer, how many times do you have to get lied to before you no longer trust the source of that data? How many times? For me, it's once. One time, I'm done until you prove yourself to me. Maybe it was a mistake, whatever. But they removed 818,000 jobs. Now, when we look at the household survey, just wanted to remind you guys where we're at as far as the full-time versus part-time. All right. And when we compare year over year, which is right here, okay, to all the way to the right here, I want to bring your attention to full-time jobs. And this is before revisions, keep in mind, but this is the household survey. As far as full-time jobs year over year, according to the survey, we have lost 1.81 million full-time jobs. This is just in 1 year. Okay, this will be revised. And as far as part-time jobs, they've tried to, and I said they, you see what I did there? I said they, Fed, elites. They are essentially saying everything's fine, but really what's happening is those full-time jobs are being replaced by part-time jobs and not even in the same number. So we lost 1.8 million full-time. We gained 1.2 million part-time jobs. And again, this is year over year. And I also want to let you guys know, as far as multiple job holders, year over year, there's 382,000 more Americans that now are working 2 jobs or multiple jobs, again, just to afford to live. That's not good. Now, as far as layoffs, this article just came out yesterday. Everything we're going over, you guys, is the most recent data. You can see right here, September 1st, Goldman Sachs lays off investment bank to cut nearly 1,800 jobs amid annual review process. Do you see, Mitch? They're saying just an annual review process. This does not have to do with the everything bubble. Mitch, this does not have to do with quantitative tightening. This does not have to do with any of that. It's cool. It's just the review process, Mitch. That's all it is. I'm sure the people, the 1,800 people that lost their job would think otherwise, but let's just keep moving on. And don't forget, you guys, there's a lot going on behind the scenes with tech. We'll get to retail here in a second, but Intel, again, just to remind you guys, and this was this month, I'm sorry, in August, Intel is laying off over 15,000 employees, okay? And so in addition to the 18,000 employee layoffs, they will also stop non-essential work. If I was working for Intel, I'd be like, what does that mean? That doesn't make me feel good about working for them. So I want you to remember Deere, okay? Deere workers talk about layoffs. This is messed up. Hundreds of John Deere, again, look at the date, August 30th, okay? Happy Labor Day, guys. And I hate to say it like that, but that is the truth. And that is the reality. We are getting blindsided here if we're not paying attention. Hundreds of John Deere employees worked their last shift on Friday as part of the layoffs that have been happening this summer. We keep going here. For a company known for minimum layoffs, Apple sure is laying off a lot of people. Look at the date. This is September 1st. This is from August 28th. This is a comprehensive list of the 2024 tech layoffs. Don't want to get into too much of this, guys, but just showing you guys in the underreported data that all companies are doing layoffs. In August, we have Apple, Brave, Scale AI, Skip the Dishes, GoPro. Are you serious? Work on your lighting at night, GoPro, and you will do better with your sales. Retention.com, Loop. I mean, you guys look at this. Cisco, geez Louise, this is just in August. LegalZoom. How can you say Dell, Intel, how could you say the economy is doing good? Let's keep going. Okay, layoffs hit food pantries in DC as costs and need soars. So they have a bigger need for food pantry, for service for people that are starving. But they're doing layoffs too, Mitch. This is such a broken system. This goes and says nonprofits that feed DC's, and this is DC. I won't go there, but I really don't think if there's a homeless epidemic in Washington, D.C., where our capital is, doesn't that mean the politicians and our leaders aren't paying attention to what's right in front of them? Doesn't that mean that? I don't know. But the poorest residents are laying off staff as inflation hits donations, pandemic-era aid, and the number of people relying on their free meals soar. In addition to that, I don't know how many people care about this. Personally, I don't really care about this, Mitch. It's like some Taylor's, but it is wasteful spending. Burning Man ticket sales drop after bad weather. Oh, okay. Do you remember last year, the bad weather? People got stuck, and I think there were some deaths there, but at least they're acknowledging. Plus tech sector layoffs. This is an interesting article, and this is today. This is September 2nd. Tech layoffs surge in August with 27,000 job cuts. That's the highest since January. And again, this is summer. People are supposed to be spending the most amount of money, I believe, this time of year. January, no, that's after Christmas. People are, reeling from that. This is the highest since January. US, China, and Canada impacted. All right, and just one more thing here. Okay, this was also from yesterday. This is Sunday, September 1st. more high-profile retail sales are getting kicked in the teeth. So we also have a horrible retail layoff epidemic going on as well. And Mitch, I don't understand why literally nobody on mainstream is talking about the retail layoffs. Another company got hit. Look at this, August 29th, Big Lots. Big Lots is about to go under 500 stores. We got Rite Aid as well. We got Dollar General. Look at some of these, man. I mean, this hits home. You know, again, there's Rite Aid. Very interesting article. Mitch, before we go under the hood and show the viewers, you know, how bad the Federal Reserve has really bankrupted the American households and small businesses and bankrupt mom and pop. So we'll get under that hood. But can you explain and share with the viewers and I your opinion on whether or not you believe currently right now is the labor market collapsing, with the understanding, Mitch, that most headlines, I had to hunt for those headlines, right? Most headlines, happy Labor Day, spend, spend, spend. We got a sale here. We got the Labor Day sale. Come spend money. Can you explain? I mean, do you really think that there's a labor market collapse happening right now?
Yes, absolutely. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg is coming. So the truth of the matter is we are in a recession by any normal measurement. The Fed has gone about manipulating data, and the reports are rewritten, revised 6 months later, which basically means what they're telling you right now is in fact lagging. It's not in advance. And we'll get into a couple of mathematical formulas shortly to show you what it would be if it was advanced. But you got 23,000 people inside of the Federal Reserve. 23,000 people can't figure out what we're about to show you. So the straight answer to your question is, yeah, we're in a recession. The data that you're seeing is lagging. And when you have revised reports, what makes you think those revised reports are accurate? Because, as I said before, they move the goalposts. If they just simply take out the amount of people that have 2 and 3 jobs, they move the goalposts. If you ignore the amount of people that have come into this country illegally, well, guess what? They're unemployed. Give or take, that's somewhere around 20 million. The real number of unemployment is close to 10.8 today, and I think that's low. So then the idea that you've got hungry people, which is what you mentioned in the Washington, D.C., these politicians are dancing on a razor blade. And I won't get into what I think about that at this very second, but we'll do that shortly. And that does prove my point, which is that 37% of the households, be it multifamily and or single family, cannot afford the roof over their head and or they will go bankrupt. And that is exactly what the data is that we've been hammering on in all these videos. We've got the evidence. It's the first time that I know of, or my attorney knows, or any of us know of, where this data is adamantly, irrefutably crystal clear. And we got it courtesy of the CADs.
And I want to tell the viewers as well, something that I'm going to be doing differently when it comes to doing videos and collaborations with Mitch. I'm also going to be including a special link for you guys. Again, every video we do now with a bucket of all of the information we're talking about. Mitch has a gift to write and do mathematical formulas. So what you guys are about to see, the next part of this video, again, in my description will be a link to the, I'm going to call it a data bucket, where you can actually access this information. And as our peers and our viewers look at it, determine whether or not you agree with it or not. But either way, we're going to be giving that back to you. I mean, I was talking to Mitch. I'm like, man, the things that you're doing, the value you're giving, the write-ups, the math, I mean, I'm doing a disservice to the viewers by not putting that link here. But also, guys, remember, there's multiple links there. Mitch, I want to get to show the viewers what you emailed me. Take a look at some of these headlines on these articles, guys. And I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we're going to move on and talk about the Federal Reserve here in a second. But again, look at the name of these articles. The top 1% of Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. And that's the real crisis here. That is the reason why America doesn't work anymore. We don't, as the people, we don't run the government. That is not our government anymore. The government belongs to the top 1% of Americans, in my opinion, and that's made the U.S. less secure. In addition, this is also another good article. Federal spending was responsible for the 2022 spike in inflation, research says. Inflation's straight evil. Inflation gets the rich richer and the poor poorer, and they're acknowledging it came from federal spending, but why would they have to acknowledge that, Mitch? I mean, it's clear the inflation comes from the Fed and quantitative easing. And I mean, like, why is people wasting their time researching this? We already know, but this is another good article, a little bit older. Great headlines. How the American middle class has changed in the past 5 decades, essentially eroding the middle class. This is crazy. Here's a little chart right here. You can see the difference between 1971 and 2021. We went from a 61% middle class to a 50% middle class. Just some data to consider. Now, here's something that I really appreciated that you sent to me, Mitch. And I'm going to read this line by line, and then I want to ask you a question. Basically, another email from Mitch. Federal spending. Okay, I'm just going to read these bullet points, Mitch. Federal spending is 2 to 3 times more important than any other factor causing inflation. So, in essence, what Mitch is saying, guys, mathematically, this is proven. The Fed causes by far the most inflation. And then he goes on, 42% of inflation could be attributed to government spending. Think about that. 42% of 42% of overvaluation. Okay. And then look at this, 17% could be attributed to inflation expectations, which is another word for manipulation. If they're counting on expectations, then surely they can manipulate that. So already, you see, this is really, really bad. Now, only 14%, the smallest of all, lower than emotion, Mitch, 14% can be blamed on high interest rates. My question, again, before we dig into the charts, before we show the viewers how bad the Federal Reserve is, can you explain to the viewers and articulate how it seems like only the elite win? It seems like, Mitch, only the people at the very, and I'm not talking about the rich. I'm talking about the hyper, filthy, disgusting. I'm never going to let go of power and control. It seems like these maneuvers from the Fed are only helping them. Can you go into the fact how the wealthy are doing better right now than the poor, Mitch? And maybe you don't feel that way. Can you just explain your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can actually do it in one sentence. Quantitative easing equals inflation, and inflation equals transfer of wealth. That's it. That's the entire sentence. That's the entire formula right there. So every time the Fed makes a move, which is what they've been doing since, give or take, 1935, that move was never, ever for the benefit of mom and pop. That move was strictly to protect the banks. That's the whole story. And that's why I've been saying that the Federal Reserve doors need to be chained. The Federal Reserve is an entity straight out of hell. And all the debt that has been created in the United States of America, where you're about to see some charts that are just straight up parabolic, that is the transfer of wealth. That is why 37% of the households cannot afford the roof over their head, and or they will go bankrupt. So the CADs are ground zero that gives you the evidence that quantifies what the results of the Fed. That's how you tie it all together.
Let's move into these charts now. And then let me throw this up. Let me throw the first one up here. This is crazy, Mitch. I want you to explain this to the viewers, but would you explain this to the viewers? Sure.
So one of the memos that we have, and you have to realize that nobody knows the exact, was it 163 trillion? Is it 152 trillion? Is it growing by the day? Obviously, yes, but nobody knows the exact amount because there's too many inputs. But with that said, your gross domestic product is only 24 trillion. Federal debt, according to this, based on this timeline, which is 2023, 24 trillion. Unfunded, 163 trillion. What I said the other day was 147 trillion, based on another report. However, this came to me through a friend of mine at MIT. I'll take these numbers, thank you very much. I'm good with this. Nobody's perfect on this, but you get the point. How in the hell your gross domestic product is literally that 16%. Well, but it's 16% of your unfunded liabilities. Where is the money going to come from to pay off these unfunded liabilities? You can say we're going to print. The Fed says we'll print M1, we'll print M2, we'll print till the cows come home. Well, then you end up with the Weimar Republic, where it would literally take a bucket of cash to go and buy a loaf of bread. They can't do it. And if you go all the way back to 2007, 2008, there's other issues there as well that they shouldn't have done what they did there.
Yeah. I mean, there's still some people, Mitch, that think that we should bail out the banks, that the Federal Reserve is helping us. But to those people, please look at your screen. And then, if you were running your life like this, like on the screen here, your income does not even cover your debt. And you have another, what is that? 6 times more debt you owe and unfunded Social Security. It's insane to me that the unfunded responsibility that the government has, and then I also asked Mitch, like, where's the money then for Social Security that people have paid into it?
Quantitative easing, which is a direct result of what you're starting to see, equals inflation, right? If things go up because the government pumps money into the system, and that equals transfer of wealth. Well, your wealth has already been transferred off that 37%. We already know that 67% of the families can't afford a median income. And now you, the taxpayer, are burdened with this 163 trillion in unfunded liabilities. You don't have the money. Nobody's got the money.
Not even close, Mitch. Not even close.
No, and then it does get worse because you end up with an amortization schedule that's actually working in reverse.
Let's go over that. I want to show the viewers now that what a transfer of wealth looks like. Mitch also sent me this graph. This is going to be in that data bucket I've been telling you guys about. But this is the national debt. And, you know, it's pretty clear when you look at this, Mitch, and I want you to go over this. This is where we had periods in our economy that it's clear the wealth gap. It's clear that the Federal Reserve got involved, whether through Congress or something. And that money printing and that injection saved the banks. All it did is save the banks, and it hurt us as American citizens because, again, the corruption, the fraud, the middleman, the fees. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But Mitch, and we went all the way back. Essentially, there's a lot to say here. But do you want to start? You want to kind of just break this down, and I'll ask some questions if they come up, Mitch.
Okay, so what is so important in this is not just the fact that it's gone parabolic, but the reason why it went parabolic. And in several of the videos I've said, there's this thing called cumulative compounding. So way back in the 70s, when we went off the gold standard was the cap. And that's why you see from 70, and things really didn't start cooking until 80. But when you had the gold standard, you literally could walk in for $1 and get a piece of gold. In
Right.
theory, it would be a real small piece, but you get the point. Okay, there was a cap on the spending. Since then, every president that has come in, every entity, every legislator on both sides, so this is state and federal, right? Because you got the same problems on the state levels. They just keep spending money that they don't have. So you've got multiple sets of fraud pushing on this. And that's why you're seeing this go parabolic. And that's why you're seeing, that's just the federal, that's not the state side. That 163 trillion doesn't count the states. So you end up with cumulative compounding because every dollar that gets spent then has its amortization schedule attached to it, but it's in reverse because they don't pay it off. They just keep adding. It's cumulative, right? When you have an amortization on your house, you pay it off over 30 years, principal and interest, and they're coming down. You're paying your principal balance off. These morons are literally saying, yeah, we don't have to pay it off. We'll just print money. And
So out of control.
To your point on the Federal Reserve, realize that there was only like a couple hundred banks when the Federal Reserve was created. You're somewhere between the shadow banks. I mean, nobody knows the exact number. Let's call it 5,000 just for the sake of conversation. That's conservative, but let's say that's what it is. Well, you go from 200 to 500, 5,000. Where's the money going to come from to bail out these banks? Federal Reserve doesn't have it on their balance sheet. Treasury doesn't have it on their balance sheet. FDIC couldn't support. If Bank of America went down, FDIC would be wiped out. One bank. So the idea that this money exists, magic money theory, is just that. Magic money theory. It's complete BS. And that's what you're seeing in this chart.
It's a reverse amortization schedule, which means, guys, your debt just gets bigger and so does your liability. An amortization schedule, at least a little tiny bit, still a trap, still a death contract, at least a tiny bit gets paid off. In this situation, it never gets paid off. It just gets worse. And I wanted to point out, it's just so interesting that, again, going back to 1971 here, Nixon closes gold window. I mean, it took about a decade, right? So we forgot about how important it was. So 1 decade passes. And then it starts going parabolic. You can kind of see that here. And then what's very interesting is, and this is crazy, it doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, we're talking about the Federal Reserve, we're talking about the destruction here. The last president, this is crazy, since 1965, it appears, was Clinton, who was able to get the deficit down. I mean, that's amazing to me. And then also, so after Clinton, Bush comes in and he's doing an okay job. Okay, whatever. But at the end of his 8 years, obviously, we had the GFC, we had some other issues, but it just went parabolic. And then Obama came in and then just, my God, man. I mean, it was just, I don't care anymore. So you got a double hit. You got Bush with a smaller hit, but then Obama comes in, destroys it. Trump here, still not good, right? But at the end of Trump's term, and absolutely parabolic, similar to what happened with Bush, where it's kind of doing a good job, and then towards the end of his term, it's like a double whammy of a hit. The next president just makes it even worse. Same thing happened here. This is absolutely disgusting. And let me show them one more. Here's the national debt as a percentage of GDP. And again, it's a very similar process right here. It's a little bit easier to kind of tell where the wasteful, reckless spending is. And again, so it kind of flans out with Trump right here. You see that? But again, the end of his boom, see that? But it's nothing compared to the Biden. Again, I'm not saying that anyone is necessarily, like Trump, he didn't cause, the lockdowns and stuff like that, but it happened during his term. And my point here is it doesn't matter who the president is. The Fed could destroy us. And again, you see that. Mitch, do you want to talk about anything here? Do you want to talk about the 2.2 trillion in CARES Act or the 1.9 trillion in American Rescue Act? And let me ask you, why are they labeling this wealth gap legislation American Rescue Plan, Recovery Act, Trouble Relief Program? It comes across like they're going to save Americans, but I don't see it saving Americans. I see them kicking the can down the road and saving the elite. Am I wrong to think that?
Everybody, including the elite, are going to get smacked over the head with what's coming. These charts are parabolic. And when you have a parabolic chart, and if you know anything about the stock market and how charts work, and that's kind of on the technical side, but you end up with what's called a Fibonacci in most times. I mean, nothing's perfect, but in most instances, you'll end up with a Fibonacci ratio that'll bring that market down about 61.8%. Well, that's what we now have is parabolic. And that's why I keep saying with the CADs and the school districts, they are bankrupt today. There is no money to be had. And that's what you're seeing in these charts. It's not a question of whose term it was. The problem when they come up with all these fancy words, those are words of manipulation. There's nothing good in here. This is just straight up criminal activity designed to take your money because you're the ones, every one of us is on the hook for these liabilities, and these liabilities can't be paid. You're 268,000 at a minimum based on 147 trillion per person, per taxpayer person. That money just isn't there.
And if there's any bulls, and you guys see in the comment section, I feel like the closer we are to this collapse, like there's more people that are emotionally driven in our comment section that don't want us to ask questions. They don't want us to find the truth, Mitch, but they don't have the answers themselves. They're just scared. So to those people, and really to anyone that's watching, I want you guys to imagine a bailout right now, because everyone's like, they're going to bail out, and they probably will do a bailout. But what is that going to do to this chart? What is that going to do to the last chart that we showed you? It's going to make the problem even worse, because we still, let's bail out. We still have money from the other bailouts in the system that they cannot spend. It's inflation. They're giving it away to immigrants. I mean, I don't even want to go there. But anyways, guys, I mean, imagine that chart getting even worse. Let's keep going, Mitch. This one's very interesting. Okay. This one is very, very interesting. This is a complete breakdown on the economy right now, guys. I mean, and who holds our debt. This is who holds the federal debt. This is going back to 1980 to about, I think, maybe 23-ish. But look at, okay, so the orange is the Federal Reserve. All right. This is basically the Treasury. The yellowish is the Treasury, Mitch. The blue is foreign entities. The bottom is public debt holders, like we hold the treasuries. I want to point out, first of all, during the GFC right here, okay, so about right here, okay, during the GFC, look at how foreign entities purchased American debt. All right, that was a buffer, if you will, or a suspension system, if you will, to the last American Great Recession. China came in and bought a lot of our debt. You see that here in this chart. But if you move forward to right now, you see the world's fed up with the U.S. and how we're bullying them and taking away assets. I won't go into that, but that has narrowed. And what has increased sharply, again, going back to 1980s, the Fed's involvement in our financing system, they hold the debt. And if they hold the debt and the Treasury holds the debt and these foreigners hold the debt, and as Americans, we hold about 26% of these treasuries, that means that everyone can manipulate the yields. They can manipulate the market. You gave a foreign country, you see this here, the ability to manipulate our markets. We see it with the unwind trade, Japan. We see this, the Keynesian effect now, because a lot of like Ben Bernanke was like, I wonder, so far so good. I wonder what the effects are going to be. We see the effects right now. And I'm going to tell you guys real quick, and I'm going to let you go here, Mitch. Jerome Powell is worse than Ben Bernanke. That is where I'm at this point. And I'm going to say the reason why, at least Ben Bernanke let the Lehman Brothers fail. At least he did. Jerome Powell bailed out a bank in California that never needed to be bailed out. I believe that's what we needed as America, let those banks fail. But Mitch, can you break this down and explain, what is the harm and how much debt the Federal Reserve is holding? What is the harm in foreign entities? How can they manipulate our markets? How does this affect us?
Well, in reality, what you're looking at there is a chart of ignorance. And it's a chart of ignorance because the Federal Reserve has exported our debt. And that happens in the form of people buying our treasuries. Now, it's a complex issue because there's multiple inputs. And those inputs can be measured, which is why I was just commenting about the 23,000 employees at the Federal Reserve. So there's a different type of mathematical formula that would get you fairly close to standard deviation. And it's called Mahalanobis. And it was created in the 1920s, I think 1927 roughly. So that takes multiple inputs that are uncorrelated inputs to help derive a what-if scenario. And that'll put you in a bracket of certain things happening, kind of like standard deviation. They're closely related. Well, what's happened here, our government will tell a foreign government like China, well, we're going to have a tariff on you because you're manipulating the market. So that's on the upper level. On the lower level, China's sitting on $4 trillion of our debt. Is that a good thing for China or any other country that's got our debt? No, but here's why it's such a chart of ignorance. Because they fell for it. Our American society fell for it. The people that are working for the Federal Reserve fell for it. This is a chart not having anything to do with the real math under the hood. The real math under the hood is there's no money to pay for any of this. Let's just kick the can down the road. This is a chart of pure ignorance.
All right. I mean, I like how you said they fell for it. What's the value? What's the collateral? The U.S. All right, let me show them this real quick. This is the Federal Reserve as a percent of publicly held debt, and this is going over QE, quantitative easing, and it's just showing you the reality of the damage of the QE. It is inflation, and it is creating a wealth gap. It's put us in a situation to where it seems like the only way for things to get back to a normal America, a normal household, is a complete restructuring, a complete collapse, because again, the damage is embedded systemically, Mitch. I mean, they printed so much money in so much quantitative easing that the money is stuck in various places. It's just bred so much systemic fraud upon fraud upon fraud. Quantitative easing is a weapon of mass destruction. Can you go into what we're looking at here? Can you go into the damaging effects of the quantitative easing, which again is initiated by the Federal Reserve? Okay.
We've already proven there's no money to pay this off. Yes. So this is a percent. This is the Federal Reserve assets as a percent of publicly held debt. You can't pay off the publicly held debt, so the assets aren't worth toilet paper, honestly. I mean, you use a 13 cents on the dollar, who knows? But that's not the underlying point. The underlying point is that 37% of the households can't pay the mortgage. They can't pay the real estate tax and cover the mortgage, or can't pay the real estate tax and put food on the table, or can't pay the real estate tax and put medicine into their kids' bodies, right? They got to be able to buy these things. The money isn't there to do it. So the creation of this debt, remember, interest, cumulative compounding, interest goes up and debt goes up because they don't pay it off. And that's what you saw in that parabolic chart. Well, at some point, that's why I said 4 or 5 videos ago, when it pulls back, in other words, it's going to go, because it'll keep kicking the can down the road, but you're going to wake up one morning and all of a sudden you're going to see major drops And that's the market acting. And if you don't get in front of the market and that market starts to drop, you will not be able to stop it. It'll bottom out at 0.618% pullback. And therein lies the ultimate problem. What I'm trying to do through these videos is explain we have to get in front of it as best we can. And we've got pretty good ideas on how to get it done. And they're rather simplistic when you think about it. But it cuts all the fat out of the middle. Well, who's the fat? Federal Reserve. You understand? They've taken, it's not 35 trillion in debt that they created. It's the unfunded liabilities plus the national debt plus the state debt. So it's so hard to get your head wrapped around these numbers because there's no one single source that can literally say, like I did with that spreadsheet that I sent you. So that's my attempt to correlate all these numbers to say, okay, this is game over. And this will stop when someday the market wakes up and says, yeah, we don't believe this crap anymore, straight down. And that's the problem. So when it stops, it'll stop hard unless people get on board, which is why all these people that we met on Saturday, I mean, an incredible series of discussions, but they jumped all over it because in their own worlds, they see this. It's just that as far as I know, this is the first time where we can actually spell it out and the CADs are the evidence.
The amount of fraud and audio fraud, lack of math in just your Central Appraisal District alone, Mitch, shocking stuff.
That's the problem. And there's another one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to end here and then I want to go into some formulas that you made for viewers to try to articulate what's going on. But, this is the overall federal liabilities and it shows you a little bit more clearly, the Social Security liabilities, Medicare liabilities. And these, again, we're making, Mitch, about, about 24 trillion a year, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
And this chart alone, and this is not taking everything into account, this is 100 trillion in liabilities. We're making 24. This is about 100 trillion. This math doesn't add up, does it?
It does, because again, first of all, nobody knows the exact numbers because the amount of data that's being input here is relatively limited because it's the government that's feeding it and they're not looking at the real amortization. And every time you issue a bond with a different coupon and a different expiration, it becomes very abnormal. But the underlying point is when you look at this, okay, they're at 100 trillion when this thing tops out. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter because even if you went down to zero interest rates, they're not paying it off. And therein lies the problem. And if you went to zero interest rates, here's the flip side of the coin. Do you know what the value of your currency is at that point? Our currency has lost in 20 years, 90% of its purchasing power. If we drop down to 0% interest rates, kiss the US dollar goodbye. It will have zero credibility. And you're right back to the same problem. These idiots have literally built their own circular argument of doom.
And a lot of people don't realize that we did have 0% interest rates from about arguably from 2009 to 2016-ish. The Americans, because citizens didn't. Guess who did, guys? Who did? The lenders, the elite. How did they have those lower rates? The Federal Reserve, mortgage-backed securities. In 2012, they blindsided us behind our backs and just parabolic the wage gap. I'm telling you guys, Operation Twist 2012. Why did they do that? They messed us up. We're seeing the effects now of all this Keynesian BS socialism that's hitting the wall. It is beyond repair. I'm going to pull up now, Mitch. Let me pull up what's called the Vexler Formula, and I want to. It's a little bit complicated, but I think this is, it just definitely deserves some attention. Go ahead and just take us down these first few lines, if you can, Mitch, and if you don't mind, explain to the viewers what we're looking at here. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit.
Okay, so I'm using those charts that Travis just put up, so they're actually built into my spreadsheet. But if you look at the U.S. national debt, 35 trillion, and you look at the unfunded liabilities, 147 trillion, gross domestic product is 27 trillion. U.S. government budget deficit in between those right now today, 1.8 trillion. In other words, the math isn't even there to support the deficit, never mind everything else. So the U.S. government tax as a percent of GDP is only 20.7%.
We're broke.
That is literally proving there is no money to pay for any of this crap. That's
insane.
The underlying problem. So the other columns over to the right, we're breaking it down by the year, and you can see back to the rule of 72 that give or take every 7 years roughly, this debt is doubling, but it gets worse. It's not just the debt, but it's the cumulative, which includes the interest. And therein lies the problem. If you don't pay off these debts and you keep rolling up and rolling out, what have you done? You bankrupted, give or take, 40, 50% of the American public immediately.
Yeah, and they are bankrupting us. They have to. So what's happening is horrible money management, fraud, corruption, greed, lies, deceit, manipulation, and they're bankrupting us, guys. They are bankrupt. It doesn't. It's come to the point where it doesn't even matter if you purchased a home in 2020 at a 3% interest rate and you have $150,000 in equity, because your property taxes, especially if you're in Texas, have exploded. If you're in Florida, you're getting hit with 6-figure assessments because the insurance companies and all these other companies cannot afford to keep up with the Fed's fraud and corruption and manipulation anymore. And a lot of people ask Mitch, they're like, well, how does this all come back to the CADs? You know, it's a multi-layered situation. And in order to explain how this comes back to the CADs, if you don't mind, can we go to that next little portion right there that says Central Appraisal District? Can you explain those first 3 rows right there and what that represents, Mitch?
Okay, so a couple of things. The Denton Central Appraisal District certified totals, give or take, call it $235 billion. The Denton Central Appraisal District overvaluation, okay, that's by virtue of the fraud, and we've got the evidence for that, and that's up on the website. Let's call it $94 billion. Well, that means the percent of overvaluation due to fraud is about 40%. So every house that you have is in reality close to 40% overvalued and overtaxed. Okay, that's a fraud. And that's all the evidence. And we have gigabytes of data, as you know, on the website. So that's all there. The connection between all this, between what the Fed has done and what the CADs have done. So if the CADs in if the Fed in 1970, for the sake of conversation, said, no matter what, we've got to control the debt. We can't allow this to expand. Do you know that we wouldn't be having this conversation? Because they would have been able to look at their own standard deviation and their own caps on expenditures and say, we're not doing it. The world would be in a much better position. Now the world, because as you saw that other chart, we've exported our debt, we've exported our treasuries that are in fact going to disintegrate. Why? Because a treasury is the exact same thing as a bond. Look at the bonds of the school districts. You think those things are worth 100 cents on the dollar? No. 80? No. 60? Probably not. 50? No. When we get down to 13, we'll start talking turkey. Why? Because there's no math to support them. The taxing entities are bankrupt. The Federal Reserve, by virtue of creating the quantitative easing, has bankrupted and taken the assets of the public. And I want to go one step further. So the Mahalanobis formula can take multiple things into account, but let's break it down and keep it real simple, or simpler. So using standard deviation, had the Fed have used that standard deviation back in the 70s and said, we're going to adhere to it, we're not going to allow anything to go up or down, plus or minus half standard deviation per year, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Well, guess what? Inside of the Denton Central Appraisal District and all appraisal districts, because they're required to use USPAP, they say they do, they don't, but in USPAP is the requirement for standard deviation. And that's why 2 videos ago, I broke down that formula of what standard deviation actually is and what it does. Well, if you have a $200,000 house and your standard deviation, let's call it 5%, we'll swap it out for inflation. So if inflation, according to the Fed, is running at 5%, plug in that number, and that means that your house, in terms of its value, should not go up or down, either side, up or down, $10,000, right? Okay, if it's $10,000, the total amount being paid out of your pocket off that $10,000, give or take, is about $120. You wouldn't care, and you shouldn't care. It's okay, because they would have adhered to the law. But standard deviation is a requirement in USPAP, and it's a requirement under the Texas Property Tax Code, and it is completely ignored. So that comes back to exactly what you're looking at here, and that's the nexus between the Federal Reserve and the CADs.
All right, let me explain standard deviation, because Mitch, I was like, Mitch, I'm sick. And Mitch is like, God, let me share my screen. I got to show you something. So he actually gave me a lesson last night on standard deviation. And I want you to correct me if I'm wrong here. I want to explain to the viewers because it's a little complicated. Standard deviation measures volatility. Standard deviation measures risk. The reason why standard deviation is a requirement in calculating value for our homes through USPAP and also the Texas Property Code is because of something called smoothing. The standard deviation, if I'm not mistaken, Mitch, it allows us to find a delta of information, basically fraud. And so when Mitch was showing me, okay, here's a standard deviation, here's how you smooth things. This is, we need the standard deviation to make sure fraud and corruption doesn't take over. Well, they're not using that because clearly it's taken over. In other words, the delta always was the same. It was the Fed and it was through the CAD. And also I want to point out above my head where you see Denton Central Appraisal District, understand you guys, that's just one single county in Texas. I bet you half the people haven't even heard of Denton County, Mitch, and they have 235, I want to explain the fraud here for a second. They have $235 billion in valuations and assessments over American homes. Okay, Mitch has calculated through his math a 40% valuation, which means that's a total of 94 billion in overvaluation. Now we looked at the average tax rate. I think it was 2.1 something. So again, this is the imaginary number. That 94 billion is imaginary. This is where the fraud is coming from. That 94 billion that equals $2 billion. Denton Central Appraisal District, who most people don't even know who they are, is just one small appraisal district compared to the big picture, is committing, according to this math, $2 billion in revenue from overassessing $94 billion in properties. There's no math, there's no smoothing, there's no standard deviation. And so, now we're in this situation. Did I get that right? Am I a good student, Mitch?
You absolutely got it right. So the standard deviation, and if you wanted to predict forward on a standard deviation, you do what we do internally on all of our projects and stuff, and you would run that out through Monte Carlo analysis. Well, the Mahalanobis formulas are almost identical, except that they can take in additional inputs. So these are known formulas, right? In my world, there's 23,000 employees at the Fed. How come they don't do it? And if they did it, we wouldn't be in this mess. So in other words, what's really gone on here is that the Fed has in fact bankrupted the United States of America. And that's why all of these people have got their hands out, give me money for taxes, because they're trying to cover up the fraud, but there's no money left to get.
Mitch, I don't blame normal American citizens, because who doesn't want to trust the government they live in? Who doesn't want to feel safe and secure? And like when we sleep at night, like everyone has the best intentions for us, our authorities, so I don't blame so many people because of the level of manipulation on mainstream media and in the economy, economists, paid financial advisors. I mean, it's all manipulation. No one's talking about the risk or standard deviation or volatility. And so I want to divert our attention here, Mitch, where it's going to go over a little bit more. This is another email that Mitch sent. I will have this in our data bucket, but he's going to actually go into stock manipulation. He talks about fake news, pump and dump, spoofing the tape, wash trade. Can you just start? And this is a great breakdown. I could read it if you want me to, but I figured it's best to come from your heart. Can you explain what's fake news? Why is that being used to manipulate people? That terminology.
I'd say right about now, probably 95% of everything you're seeing in the press and everything, all these reports, I mean, we've already proven it to you, because if you have a reversion or a revision of a report coming from the federal government, that's manipulation. Well, you have the same thing in the media world having to do with the market itself. So fake news causes values to move up or down one way or the other, because think about it. You now know, by virtue of these videos, much more than any of these CADs do. You're beginning to understand the math under the hood. And if you understand the math under the hood, then you can see instantly the manipulations. So what I did here is I just laid out, from the standpoint of the stock market person, what happens to their manipulation in their world. Well, in reality, it's kind of the same thing in the real estate world. So you have fake news, that's clear. The pump and dump we discussed in the last video. That's just simply taking a penny stock and saying, well, I think it's going to go to the moon. Some guy gets on YouTube, you listen to the YouTube guy, it moves up $2. Next thing you know, it'll move up to a parabolic level and then it'll crash back. It's magic, right? So the spoofing is something that's done by people with a lot of money where they can actually push values. And those are the institutional traders that can do that. The bear rating is kind of the same thing, right? They'll pump it up to a certain point and then they're going to go and look, because that's what the market does. It goes and looks for the bottom. So it's all about price discovery. These are just different methods of accomplishing the same task. And you don't want to get involved. I mean, you have to be able to understand what it is you're looking at in order to see it. Well, the same thing occurs on the real estate side. So that article that we had a couple of days ago on the last video from the state comptroller, well, that's exactly what that article was. That's gaslighting the public. And when you gaslight the public, that's why I bled all over that thing. I redlined it, and Travis has got the red line. It's complete nonsense. There's not a stitch of truth in it. And then that's why I laid down a gauntlet and said, look, you want to debate me? Please, let's go. 15 to 1 odds. They won't do it. That's kind of not the point. The point is that this is a criminal conspiracy to defraud the public. And Travis made a comment a minute ago that's pretty important that I want to bring back on the table. Your money is being taken. It's going down. At the upper end, by virtue of the financial engineering, the principal and interest debt is going up. What I'm trying to do here with these videos is explain, why do we want to eliminate real estate tax? Because you give the balance sheet back to mom and pop. You have the right to own the land under your feet. And by virtue of an amortization schedule, and 1, and 2, investing just $2,400 a year in an index, at the end of 30 years, you'll end up with a house that's free and clear, and you'll end up with roughly $1 million in cash just off that $2,400, because now you're putting the cumulative compounding to your benefit, not to the benefit of people who are stealing the money trying to protect the banks. Let the damn banks go bankrupt, and you solve a big chunk of this problem. And I'm not saying taxes don't have to pay. Then we take it up to the next level, and we'll get there in a minute.
We will get there. I want to talk about a couple things though. Now, in 2023, I think March of 2023, the Bank Term Funding Program was created. Federal Reserve Jerome Powell, they bailed out the banks. Do you think at that time the Fed should have let those banks fail, Mitch?
On the spot, and then arrested. And I'm 100% capitalist. Don't get me wrong, but the executives that did this should have been taken out and jailed. You want start putting people in jail.
There's still people, Mitch. There's still people that are like, no, they should have. If they wouldn't have saved those banks, there'd have been chaos. Well, that's exactly what we need.
Well, no. Do you understand what we have right now is chaos raised to the power of 4.
Okay.
The only thing that hasn't happened here is a civil war.
Awareness.
What we've got is chaos, because when you see these charts going parabolic, substitute the word parabolic for chaos. When you see mom and pop that can't afford the roof over their head, when you see a Washington, D.C. group of people that are trying to feed other people that can't afford their employees, that's chaos.
Yeah. And honestly, to those people that think that, we should have, saved those banks, Mitch, I say we should just tax them then. Don't tax me. Don't take my children's future away. All the people that wanted to save the banks, do a poll. If you wanted to save the banks, let's divert that expense to those people that still want to play that fraud, evil inflation game, and they don't care about society. They don't care about their communities, Mitch. If you're bailing, why would you side with saving someone that has taken someone's money and lost it, probably illegally through fraud? Why would you want to back them up? To the 10% of the people that I put out a poll, 10% of those people said they should have bailed out the banks. Why? Because you hurt me by doing that. Why do you think it's okay to hurt me? Why do you think it's okay to hurt my children, to help complete strangers that are filthy rich that deserve to lose? Because if I made those same mistakes, Mitch, I actually did make those same mistakes, and I did lose, and I lost heavy, and I lost for a long time, and no one was there to bail me out. I had to make a decision as an individual person to get myself up. I had to take the pain. I had to conquer the challenges, my very bad credit, having a tax lien hung over me for 9 years, right? They wanted to garnish my wages, levy my bank accounts for 9 years. I had to go through that. I don't understand why these other people that make these mistakes don't have to go through that. The Fed put is killing us, and Jerome Powell is an absolute clown. He is an absolute fraud. This man is the worst Federal Reserve chairman that I have ever witnessed in my lifetime. I used to think that no one could be as worse as Ben Bernanke, Mitch.
So
I take that back.
yeah,
Take that back. Can you go into, do you think that we should have gone in depression in 2009? Obviously, and I say that, let me explain to the viewers. We went into recession, great financial crisis, end of 2007, beginning of 2008. And then they started bailing out. They started mortgage-backed securities, and they prevented, and this is according to the Federal Reserve chairman, prevented a depression. Do you think they should have let that pain continue, Mitch?
absolutely. Because
Why?
this problem has grown exponentially. And if you look at those parabolic charts, the difference between 1970 and the parabolic chart going up, I want everybody to realize that there's something called inversion, okay? Well, the debt and the interest carry is an amortization schedule in reality in reverse, right? It's going in the wrong direction. You want to be able to pay it off.
Yeah.
That amount of money between 1970 and where we are today, when it went up, you understand that that's money that's been taken out of your pocket.
Yeah.
Think of the inversion of the chart. You could literally say, okay, if mom and pop had invested this money on their own personal balance sheets, instead of having debt going into somebody else's pocket, that would be their profit. The chart becomes inverted. And that's the goal. Give mom and pop back their balance sheet so they can start growing the way they're supposed to. So this takes a unified approach. What we're saying here is, yeah, the real estate taxes absolutely have to go away in favor of a sales tax, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, mom and pop are the economic engine. And there's simply no excuse for this, because these banks that you were mentioning a minute ago, I want to come back on that. Those banks are levered, heavily levered.
Yes.
Okay. The unregistered banks are even more heavily levered. They're creating credit where there's technically no asset backing up the credit. Smoke and mirrors, magic money theory. Well, those banks, they have what's called tier 1 capital requirements. We don't know of a bank right now that's even passes the tier 1. Again, the Fed says, and the Treasury, well, we're going to move the goalposts. It's not quite what you see over here. We're going to do it this way, and we're going to get rid of this. The banks are so heavily levered that they're going to collapse no matter what. But the longer this goes, every single day, all you got to do is go to the U.S. debt clock, .com, and you will see by the second how much money. There's billions of dollars a day going out in interest that nobody's got the money to pay for. And by the way, that debt clock is only the national debt. That's not the unfunded liabilities. There's no math. Chaos is going to go up exponentially. And that's why you've got these charts that are parabolic.
Mitch, I'm going to get you to the sales tax. I want to bring one thing up. When we were talking last night and you were going over smoothing, you were going over mathematical future ways to predict volatility and price ranges. And then we found, obviously, there's an impossibility to get the values that we have right now without manipulation. But during that conversation last night, you articulated how the economy should crash 60%. Can you articulate that one more time?
Well, it's kind of coincidental. There is such a thing called Fibonacci ratios, and they've been used for thousands of years. Actually invented by a guy named Fibonacci back in Italy many millenniums ago. So quite often, not always, but quite often, in the stock market, if you look at a chart and you get these magic pullbacks where things go wonky, they end up coming down to 50%, 38%, 61.8%. There's certain levels. Well, if you look at those parabolic moves, when you get a parabolic chart, they slam down, and it may take a couple of gyrations to come down, but they typically bottom out at about 61.8%. And that, at that point, magically is what is deemed, when it stops, you get under double bottom. But that becomes, at that point, what the market is thinking is fair value. Well, if you go back and look at one of those parabolic charts, you're going to find a double bottom somewhere right now today. You're going to see it and be able to mark it off on the Fibonacci level. Is it 50%? Who knows? Is it 61.8%? But it'll be a Fibonacci level. And that's what happens. So that pullback is coming. Everything is great and rosy when nobody's paying any attention to it until it's not. You're going to wake up one morning and say, uh-oh, and the market's going to drop 2,000 points, coming off the S&P. And by then it'll be too late, right? Because once the market is in front of this, which is what ideally we don't want to see, we want this done in a very understanding, very selective, with all Americans on board as to how to get out of this mess. And then it'll work perfectly. It'll be slow, but it won't be a disaster. What we're staring down right now is a 4-barrel shotgun.
4-barrel. I think they'd probably make those, the Civil War coming potentially. Now, and to the viewers, don't worry, we're going to end with solution. So we won't leave you guys hanging. We will end with solution. But I want to move on now to this, write-up that you did right here, Mitch. Let me put it on the screen for the viewers right here. And, I don't want you to read, necessarily it word for word, Mitch. I want you, if you can, to break this down. I've had a lot of people like, well, if we take property taxes, what about all this? It's like, well, the property taxes are fraud. So you got to take them away. You're frauding my children and my family and my ability to have a peaceful, healthy life. If I don't work, the system swallows me up. If I don't, you know what I'm saying, Mitch? I can work 7 days a week. The minute I stop working, we collapse. That's not freedom. That's a debt prison. But you guys, this is going to be linked in our data bucket. So this will be one of the things you guys can come back here. This is, Mitch's work. Do you want to go over this? Because, we hear that all the time, Mitch, and I think you brought up some pretty good points here in this 4-page document. Do you want to break this down?
Yeah. So the CADs, so Travis, what he just said is accurate. The CADs are a fraud. They're a fraud on society, period, end of paragraph. Did it start out intentionally that way? No. Did it morph into that, at least since 2016? Absolutely, because we've got the data to back it up. The numbers that are coming out of the CADs, their databases are irretrievably corrupted. What they did by ignoring USPAP is that they created the fraud. USPAP has certain requirements, including standard deviation. They don't do it. And then, of course, we've got this testimony from Charles Stafford to Mr. Don Spencer. You and your team are the masters at guessing. That proves on the spot that they're guessing, and that's the fraud. Okay, fine. What they have done is they took what should have been under USPAP, which is objective, and they have made it purely subjective. We have to get every stitch of the fat out of the middle of this operation that is subjective and make it objective. How do you do that? Well, the sales tax system already exists. It's not perfect, but we'll get into that in a second in that chart that's on that page. But sales tax already exists. You know what the cost of a 2x4 is. So if that tax goes up in a uniform manner across the United States, every single state, without exception, would be able to balance its legitimate budget. And that is the underlying point to this. So you'll see in there's a chart that says, well, we don't do a tax on groceries, or we don't do a tax on medicine, or we don't do a tax on gasoline. Here's the point. Screw all that, right? Because it's not uniformly applied. Mm-hmm. You want something that's uniformly applied between the states, and then you will have no problem balancing the states' budgets. You will have no problem whatsoever balancing the municipalities' budgets. You will have no problem balancing, because the federal government's got the IRS. Doing it this way on a state level, you fix all of this in one fell swoop, and you put everybody in the United States on the exact same plane. You simply say, this is how we're going to do it. So one of the things that was brought up when I was doing the research, well, we have the reason you see some of these gyrations, what's exempt, what's taxable, what's this, what's that. All the states have an idea or a theory. Well, we want to protect somebody who is low income. Perfectly fine. No issue. I agree 100%, but not the way you're doing it. The way you do it is everybody, no matter who you are, is on the exact same plane. You want to buy gasoline? This is the tax you pay. You want to buy a grocery? This is the tax you pay. It's just a percentage. So the percentage difference from one state to another state, regardless of the size of the population, it doesn't matter. It's just a percentage. You can pick your own percentage to balance your budget. But in order to see, there's a difference between socialism, which is what I told you before from comment from my dad when I was 8 years old. Socialism steals money at the expense of everybody and transfers that wealth. And that's exactly what the Fed has done, except in reverse, right? Because it's cumulative and compounding. being socially minded, a social policy to protect somebody who is low income, that part's easy, right? Because all you have to do is say, fine, if you spend this money, you're entitled, we, the federal government, will allow you to take that off your taxes. And then if there's a difference in the discrepancy that says, well, they still have to lay that money out, okay, fine. You have a certain income, it doesn't conform, then there's a coupon. Easy. The solutions are right in front of everybody, but nobody can get to the solutions because they can't articulate and show what the damage is caused by the Fed and the fraud at the CADs. You put these two things together, and now it's crystal clear.
Well said, sir. Well said. I'm gonna round us out. We've been talking over an hour. I hope we've given the viewers overwhelming value. Mitch. I want to talk a little bit about solution. I mean, you knocked it out. Essentially, what he's saying as well, guys, that he didn't cover as much as, in addition to all those things, everything's uniform, so none of this trickery and voodoo magic sorcery. You're going to be able to find the delta. You're going to be able to find the outlier, which is the fraud.
Yeah, and over and above that, think of all the fat in the middle that is literally making their living off of stealing real estate taxpayers' money. It all goes away.
How many employees does the Fed have? 23,000?
23,000. That's a small part of the fat. The amount of, you can switch your business model. So real estate tax consultants can switch their model into segregating expenses on behalf of those people. And now you're helping the people. You're delivering value for their money. But the problem is, the real estate tax consultants may not be aware of it, but that 30% that those real estate tax consultants make is actually already baked into the CAD's numbers. The CADs know exactly what's going on.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. You guys should, we're not financial advisors. You guys shouldn't have to be paying tax consultants to fight property taxes 30%, which brings me to our solution. Mitch, let's talk a little bit about our solutions. Obviously, guys, number one step is being aware. You can't do anything about anything if you're living a lie. Whether you agree with this or not, I encourage you to follow the data, follow the money, and overlay that with American life. What are we sold when we grow up? Are we sold, if you work hard, you're going to get a house, you're going to get married, you're going to have all these things. I mean, that's gone. It's destroyed. So part of the solution is the awareness and then joining a movement, okay? Sign the petition. If you feel the way we feel about taxes, take 10 seconds, sign the petition. It's in the link. On top of that, it's also, the awareness, but the empowerment through that awareness. And we're not leaving you hanging. Take the course. The course is going to be in my description. It's not done, but if you want to advance on how property tax works, I made a free course for you guys. Who's doing that? We're doing that. It's a free course because we want you guys to be empowered, not just going to leave you hanging. Take the course. It's in the description. It's only to chapter 4, but take it. Okay. That's part of the solution. Access the data. All right. I have a new data bucket link. You want the data that we shared here? You want to share that? You want to share the message? You want to make your community aware? That's a good start as well, because it takes more than Mitch and I. It takes more than Mitch and I. That's why we have these links. That's why we have this data. That's why we're telling you there's strength in numbers. All we want you to do is help us save American families and our lives. All right. I want to be able to raise my children without being stressed out of my mind that I can't afford my bills, Mitch. I want to raise my children without freaking out, sending them to the public school system. This is not how I was raised. This is a sad situation, but that doesn't mean we can't grow from it and we can't, hedge ourselves. It's going to be hard though, Mitch, because when the whole world appears to has been lying to you and is against you and has been frauding you, there's an initial point where these viewers, a lot of them are going to respond emotionally. They're going to attack. They're going to say, stop your questions. You're a doomer. You're just getting views. But the reality is those people just don't want us asking questions. The reality is those people don't want us hunting. And also the reality is those people don't have the answer. And so I think that this conversation and conversation like this are important. Mitch, do you want to give any encouraging words to end this out, sir?
Yeah, this is a nonpartisan issue. It doesn't matter if there's 20 parties out there. It doesn't matter, because the truth is this is your pocketbook. If you're a Democrat, this is your pocketbook. And for anybody to stand up and say, well, we just like the current system, you're arguing against your family, you're arguing against your friends, and frankly, you're arguing against yourself, because when this thing blows to shreds, which it will, that's what the math says, okay? You're arguing against yourself. The position we're taking is, in a unified basis, look at the problems around you, understand that your money has been stolen. If you're part of that 37% of the households right now today, your money's been stolen. If you're part of the 67% that can't afford what is defined as a median home in your area, you're on your way to having your money stolen. Okay? And then you look at the debt load. Well, you're not responsible. Every single taxpayer that's out there right here, right now, today is responsible for $268,000 in federal government liability. I'm quite sure, just like the rest of us, not very many people have that type of money floating around and say, yeah, here's a check for 268 grand. Let's cut the crap. It doesn't work like that. The money isn't there. Therefore, this is a nonpartisan issue. And the only thing, in addition to what Travis said, take the videos, your choice, whatever video, send it to your friends, send it to your family, send the link. Travis has got some of these things already put in a bucket. Send that link to anybody. It doesn't matter what side of the equation they're on, because it's going to affect them. They may not agree at the speed, but you cannot say that the evidence doesn't exist. We've got gigabytes sitting on our website. This is all real. These charts are real. Your bank account, or lack thereof, is real. You just have to understand what happened to you and why, and then everybody participates together to climb out of this mess. It will be painful, but better to climb out in unison than have absolute chaos as a direct result of the event. And the chaos definition comes when the market gets in front of everybody. At that point, this is game over and there's anything anybody can do, and it will be a greater depression. I think it can be avoided.
Well said, man. And it's not though. It won't be because of the division. I mean, we are born and raised divided. I'm looking back at this, Mitch, and I'm just reflecting on my childhood and how I was raised, and why did it take me so long to care? Right? Why did it take me so long to figure this out for myself and start asking the question why? Well, I know
it's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. The reality is this is hidden.
Yes,
right?
It is hidden.
None of this would have happened, but for the fact of what the CAD did in 2016, but for the fact that Leslie and I dug in 2017, and we realized how bad this fraud was, and we kept digging and digging and digging. All these things that we're talking about now, the ability to grab these charts is a direct result of all this research that's been done. Yeah. But from the average person, there's no way in this world they could figure this out because it's all hidden.
It's a little bit my fault though still. I'm saying, but also it's not, right? But my point I'm trying to make, Mitch, is like I was busy trying to figure out how to put food on my table and making sure I have baby formula and baby diapers. So I assume that the people in charge are honest. What a fool I am, huh? What an idiot, absolute idiot I am, man.
I left the country over this exact issue. Right?
Yeah.
When I left Canada, I was making a lot of money, but I didn't have any money. My taxes when I left were 75% net effective. So I left a country because of its social. I left my home country because of its socialist policies. Lo and behold, here we are, 33 years later, in the exact same nonsense.
Well, hopefully we can, have enough people step up, start asking questions like why, start holding the elected officials and whoever they're voting for accountable. And also, I hope people stop spending wastefully. That's another solution is like, okay, you're aware of, oh my gosh, what's going on? Well, stop being part of it. You're literally, remember, consumer spending is 70% GDP. If enough of us stopped spending wastefully and started like spending on our future, like saving money and things like that, not wasteful spending, learning how these things work, then we would be better off. We wouldn't be in such a deep situation, I think. But the problem is, again, and Mitch, you're right, it is not people's fault, but we are so divided, man. The media can divide us in 24 hours. The entire media has the potential to trick people enough to keep us completely divided. And when we're divided, things get confusing for people that don't have the luxury of the time we have, Mitch. We have the luxury of time to dig in. It's my job now, right? I have that blessing now. What about Carrie that works 2 jobs to pay her property taxes? Do you think she has the time?
Nope. No, but the division is sown by, in reality, people who benefit from the fraud.
Yeah.
And it turns out that is the actual uniting factor. When people realize that they've been lied to and they have been induced and they have had crimes committed against them by virtue of the fraud, and all of a sudden they start to see clearly, and that's the unifying factor. It's not
Yeah,
a partisan issue. People who have been lied to and whose money has been stolen, they're on the exact same plane. They just don't know it.
You know what? I'm going to start calling this, man. Maybe I'll call the data buckets economic apocrypha. We have economic apocrypha. So you guys look for the economic apocrypha link. It's going to be in the description. Really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. I know, but I also know how passionate you are about exposing the fraud and helping people, Mitch. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate all this effort. Thank you for also allowing me to take that information and give it back to the viewers for free. That means a lot. I'm trying to keep up with you. That's, you know, the classes, right? And you guys, again, don't forget to take the classes. But other than that, again, share this, like this, comment below, share your opinions. The comment sections for you guys. There's going to be no suppression, freedom of speech. And obviously, guys, the freedom of speech pertains to the comments that you don't like. Those comments could potentially, some of them can actually help keep us sharp. So we're not going to do any of that. We want you to grow. And other than that, guys, if you're out there investing in real estate, investing in the economy, just living your life, we wish you luck. And we always hope you win.